After my husband's first love returned to the capital city, I secretly kept a lover on South Street. He was a poor examination candidate who'd come to sit for the imperial exams. His looks were 7/10 like someone I loved. I kept him for half a year. Then I got bored and found an excuse to vanish completely. Who knew that 6 months later, a new emperor would ascend the throne? My husband and I went into the palace to pay our respects. I lifted my head and saw my old lover sitting on the dragon throne, wrapped in bright yellow dragon robes, his gaze dark and unreadable. What a coincidence! The Marchioness looks exactly the same as my wife. My lower abdomen fluttered. Inside, I was already 6 months pregnant. My husband came home dead drunk and for once spent the night in my room. 1 month later, the physician diagnosed me as pregnant. The day he learned I was with child, my husband didn't close his eyes the whole night. He held the sachet my cousin had given him and sat under the eaves, staring into the wind until dawn. The next morning, he sat at my bedside. Looking at my still flat belly, his eyes went red again without his noticing. Grief or not, he still held my hand. "Bella," his tone was resolute, "everything that's happened before was my fault. Now that we have a child, I'll turn over a new leaf. I'll live well with you from now on." On my face, tears streamed in grateful rivers. In my heart, I only found his words absurd. In this vast marquisate, it made no difference whether he was here or not. My mother had taught me from childhood that in great noble families, marriage was for fame and rank, for status and dignity. True feeling mattered least of all. But my cousin was different. She wanted only true feeling. My cousin was the brightest woman in the capital city. She was stunningly beautiful, brilliant with the brush, and gifted in every art. All over the capital city, noble scions and high ministers alike were smitten with her. Among them was my husband, heir of Yongchan Marcus Manor. Even though my cousin never spared him so much as an extra glance, he still guarded his virginity for her sake. Before marrying me, he turned Yongchan Marquis Manor upside down. After marrying me, he never once set foot in my rooms. A little more than a year after our marriage, the old Marquis died, and my husband inherited the title. But once my cousin returned to the capital city, he cast the marquisate behind him in an instant and spent his days trailing after her, trying to please her. In this enormous manner, all the guests, accounts, and purchases fell to me alone. My mother-in-law lay ill in bed. Seeing how exhausted I was, she exempted me from daily morning greetings. "It really has been bitterly hard on you." One afternoon, she held my hand and sighed long and deep. "When Bill comes home, I'll talk to him properly. He's a married man. How can he run after another woman all day long? What kind of behavior is that?" I bowed my head meekly and agreed, but felt little inside. The less my husband came home, the better. He could chase after her. I'd have my own fun. After my cousin returned to the capital city, my husband rarely came home. Bored and idle, I kept a lover on South Street. He was a poor examinee who'd come to sit for the exams from a humble family, but with first-class looks. The moment I saw him, I liked him. I fabricated a persona as a wealthy merchant's wife and, under the pretext of sponsorship, slowly drew him in. First I sent him books, then paper and ink. By day we talked poetry and prose. By moonlight, we shared our hearts. In the end, with so much coming and going, we ended up in bed. The examinee, constrained by ritual propriety, was bashful for quite some time. But after my tears and coaxing, again and again, he finally yielded. I rented a courtyard on South Street. First, to give him a place to live. Second, so I could go there every night and share a private tryst with him. Slowly, it seemed he developed real feelings. Every night afterward, he would heat water and carefully wash my body. In the mornings, he would take up a brush and draw in my brows with meticulous care. Sometimes, when I spoke of my husband, who never came home, he would suddenly grip my hand and solemnly promise, "When I pass the palace examination and take first place, I'll go see your husband and ask him to release you. If he doesn't love you, why drag you down for a lifetime? Don't worry. Once you regain your freedom, I'll immediately send the 3 letters and 6 gifts and marry you properly." Looking at his earnest eyes, I couldn't help shivering. Whenever men spoke of love, they all became like my husband, like an old house catching fire, impossible to put out. I needed to get out, quickly. The excuse was ready-made. My husband had turned back from his wayward path. A prodigal who returns is worth more than gold. Since he'd returned as his proper wife, of course I must live well with him. Today was my last meeting with the examinee. After explaining all this, I put on a show of reluctance, stroked his cheek, and told him I'd rented the house until half a year later so he could focus on the exams without worry. His expression turned ghastly, but no matter whether he wept or raged, my mind was made up. That night, he was particularly rough. Deep into the night, bruised all over, I dragged myself back to the marquisate. I had barely washed and lain down when someone outside announced that the Marquis had returned. The next second, my husband, reeking of wine, stumbled into my room. He blinked at me, and his eyes grew red. "Liddy said, since I'm already married, I should go back and live properly with you." Liddy was my cousin, full name Lydia Liu. Anything she said, my husband obeyed without question, even if she told him to honor another woman as his wife. I watched in silence as my husband hiccuped and staggered toward me. 1 step, 2 steps. Thump. He collapsed on the floor, dead drunk. I sighed, dragged him up onto the bed, blew out the candle, and went to sleep. The next morning, my husband saw the two of us with disheveled clothes and assumed we had consummated the marriage the night before. A month later, I was diagnosed pregnant, and he took the child for his own. After my husband turned back from his wandering ways, I spent half a year carrying the child in the marquisate. In these 6 months, I stayed mostly behind closed doors, yet still heard of many great events. The biggest of all was the establishment of the new heir apparent in the Eastern Palace. The late emperor left no sons, only a single daughter who died early. In recent years, his health had declined. The battle over succession only grew fiercer, with many imperial princes fighting like enraged roosters. Then, at this year's palace examination, His Majesty recognized his crown prince, lost among the common folk. The prince was an examinee who'd come to the capital city that year. They said he looked exactly like His Majesty. During the palace exam, the emperor was stunned the moment he saw him. After carefully questioning the young man's registered birthplace and age, he broke down in tears on the spot. 20 years earlier, when the emperor went on a southern tour, he had once favored a commoner woman. He never revealed his identity, left only a token, and promised to send for her soon and bring her to the capital city. And then, once back in the palace, he simply forgot. The woman became pregnant, terrified and alone, and was driven out by her father and brothers. But as people say, motherhood makes one strong. She raised the child alone. The child made something of himself. He studied diligently, and while still young, became an examination candidate. After his mother died, he carried the token to the capital city to seek out his birth father, hoping to fulfill her final wish. He looked too much like the emperor, so much so that His Majesty recognized him at a glance. Once father and son were reunited, the emperor immediately named him crown prince. As if a burden long carried had finally been set down, His Majesty's health suddenly worsened after naming the heir. Within a month, he passed away. The crown prince became the emperor. When my husband and I entered the palace to pay our respects to the new emperor, I was 6 months pregnant. In those months, my husband appeared truly reformed, tending to me and our affairs with diligence. On the carriage into the palace, he held my hand and sighed. His Majesty is flawless in every respect, except that his harem is empty. He refuses to hold a selection, saying he already married in the common world years ago. Though he's now lost contact with his wife, he intends to find her and make her his empress. Unlike the late emperor, this one seems to be a faithful sort. Leaning obediently into his arms, I listened to his sighing. Inside, I was a little amused. Faithful? There are no truly faithful men in this world. There are only women who calculate step by step until the man cannot escape from the palm of their hand. Look at my husband. He pined after my cousin for years. But now, he'd forgotten her too. The carriage rolled into the palace, and my husband and I went together to the imperial study. Your subject and his wife pay our respects to your Majesty. Dispense with the formalities. Rise. The figure in bright yellow beside the desk spoke mildly. Why did that voice sound familiar? I slowly lifted my eyes and saw my former lover sitting on the dragon throne, a faint smile playing about his lips. Looking at those familiar features, I froze. Examinee, emperor, ascension. The jumble of clues and words crashed together and coalesced into a fact that left me dumbstruck. The lover I had abandoned half a year ago was now the emperor. The Marquise and Marchioness truly are a devoted couple. And what a coincidence. The Marchioness looks exactly the same as my first wife. How long have you been pregnant, Marchioness? His question was calm, but I broke out in a cold sweat. My husband, oblivious, answered at once. In reply to your majesty, it has been 6 months and more. On the throne, the emperor arched a brow, his gaze turning murky. 6 months. To my ears the words rang with hidden meaning. To my husband they were nothing at all. Whatever the emperor asked, he answered respectfully, never sensing a thing. Question by question, the time wore on until nearly noon. The emperor glanced at the hour, then bade us remain in the palace for lunch. My husband naturally obeyed. As his wife, no matter how much I might balk inside, I had no choice but to follow. Fortunately, the emperor did not dine with us. My husband and I sat in a side hall, attendants serving dish after dish. Watching the dishes come out one by one, my heart gave a jolt. From hot soup to stir-fried dishes, from snacks to desserts, every single one was something I loved. Your appetite's been poor during the pregnancy. Eat more, my husband urged, piling food into my bowl. I smiled bitterly and answered. In my mouth, everything tasted like wax. When we were nearly finished, an attendant came from the emperor, summoning my husband alone to the imperial study. He went by himself, leaving me sitting in the side hall, restless with unease. When I finally looked around again, the side hall was utterly still. At some point, all the attendants had vanished. I was alone. Is anyone there? I called out. No one answered. I sat in the hall, sweat beading cold on my back. My hands instinctively covered my belly. There was no need to think about it. This was the emperor's doing. Half a year ago, he'd been a poor examinee. When I'd approached him on South Street, pretending to be a wealthy merchant's wife, every name and detail I gave him was false. Now that he was emperor, finding out who I really was the easiest thing in the world. And once he knew, he would know I'd been lying to him all along. Men are all the same. They can let you act willful, misbehave, but they cannot bear being toyed with in the palm of your hand. Once they realize it, their pride shatters, and no one can predict what they'll do next. All I could hope for now was that he'd remember how I once supported him and wouldn't seek revenge too cruelly. As long as I lived, there would still be room to maneuver. The Marchioness seems very much at ease. A flash of bright yellow stepped in from outside. I rose at once and saluted. Your subject's wife greets your majesty. He came toward me, step by step. Finally, he stopped before me. I held my submissive, kneeling posture, motionless. Only when my thighs burned and my body trembled did I finally hear the emperor's indifferent words. Sit. I let out a breath. Thank you, your majesty. The emperor sat above, unreadable and dark. I sat to the side, back straight, knees pressed together, properly on edge. Half a year ago, in that little house on South Street, I'd always lounged back on the couch, comfortably watching him read in the sun. In less than 6 months, that open, blazing devotion had turned strange and unrecognizable. I looked down at my hands, clenched faintly into fists. A thin thread of unwillingness rose in my throat, only to be crushed back down by reason. We sat like that, silent for a long time. Just when I thought the meeting would end in nothing but quiet, the emperor finally spoke. The Marquise and Marchioness truly are a loving, devoted couple. Thank you for your majesty's praise. The more I look, the more the Marchioness resembles my first wife, as if you were the same person. Your subject's wife is not worthy of such comparison. Whatever he asked, I skirted around, offering vague answers. At last, the emperor lost his patience. Isabella Lou, he strode forward, grabbed my chin, and forced me to look straight at him. Did you ever have even half a true feeling for me? I stared, stunned. What did that mean? He sounded as if his own feelings for me had been deep and true. Seeing I didn't answer, he only grew angrier. I will ask you one question, and you must answer truthfully. If I find you've lied, I'll charge you with deceiving your emperor and drag down the entire marquisate with you. He glared sharply, but deep in his eyes there was something like a plea. Whose child are you carrying? On the way home, my husband slipped an arm around me and told me what had just happened. I waited in the imperial study for almost half an hour, but His Majesty never came. When he finally did, the first thing he said was that he wanted my help finding his first wife. Find her? Fine. But he wouldn't even give a name or birthplace. He only said his first wife looked very much like you, and that I'd recognize her as soon as I saw her. Bella, do you think you might have a sister who looks like you? My brow twitched. My lips were a little swollen, and I had been gently rubbing them with a finger. At his words, I quickly dropped my hand. You must be joking, husband. I don't have any sisters who look like me. I have only one elder brother and one younger brother. Among our relatives, there's just my cousin, and we don't resemble each other at all. When I mentioned my cousin again, my husband's expression didn't flicker. He thought of her face, then looked at mine and laughed, shaking his head. You're right, you don't look alike. Ah, how am I supposed to carry out this errand then? Seeing that I had successfully steered the topic away, I let out a quiet breath and sighed. Back in the side hall, right after the Emperor had asked that question, I'd started crying. I sobbed until I was nearly choking, until the sky and earth spun. Seeing me like that, the Emperor couldn't press further. He only held me and tried to comfort me. In the end, he never asked again whether the child was his. But from what I knew of him, he probably took my silence as consent. No sooner had my husband and I returned to the Marquisate than an imperial edict arrived. It praised Marquis Shai's character and ability, and my own meekness and modesty as Marchioness. We were granted 100 taels of gold. My husband was assigned to oversee the salt administration in Jiangnan, to depart in half a month. At the same time, I was granted the rank of a second-class titled lady. Salt administration was a fat post, the sort every powerful clan begged for in times of peace. And it had just fallen into my husband's lap? The eunuch who delivered the decree was all humility. We could learn nothing from him. My husband mulled it over all night and finally concluded that the Emperor had taken a liking to me. Transference, perhaps, from missing his first wife. Seeing someone who resembled her, he naturally felt a bit of fondness. Since His Majesty's native place was also in Jiangnan, my husband decided to use the opportunity to investigate the Empress-to-be's whereabouts. I lowered my gaze and said nothing. It was a good thing, all in all. My mother-in-law's health had been poor for years, and she'd been confined to her bed. But when she heard of this great good fortune, she rallied at once. Within days, she was able to walk again. The Marquisate, once quiet as a tomb, suddenly blazed with popularity. My cousin, who had once firmly rejected my husband, now came running to the manor several days in a row. Though she always claimed she'd come to see me, I knew she was really using me as a pretext to see him. Unfortunately for her, my husband had already put her out of his heart. Each time he avoided her. Seeing that only stoked her competitive nature. She swore she'd win him back under her skirts. I pretended to notice nothing at all and focused on caring for the child. Men, after all. If she enjoyed playing with them, let her play. On the day my husband left the capital city, he held my hand with tearful eyes. Bella, stay here in the capital and rest. I'll do my best to return before you give birth. I put on a moved expression, watching eagerly as he rode away. As soon as I turned back, my face smoothed. I had barely sat down with a cup of tea when a servant reported that after my husband's carriage left the city, my cousin also took a carriage to chase him out of town. I arched a knowing brow. My husband had his own affairs to keep him busy. Good. He could be busy with his, and I with mine. As expected, that very night, someone climbed over my courtyard wall. Don't scream. The Emperor covered my mouth. It's me, Bella. Once I recognized him, my eyes filled with tears again, bright and shimmering. The Emperor was instantly at a loss. Don't cry. He wrapped me in his arms, pressing his forehead to mine. I took the chance to bite down hard on his shoulder. A muffled grunt sounded above me, followed by a low chuckle. Feel better? He asked. Heat rose in my cheeks. I pretended to be shy and bit his chin instead. In the dim candlelight, his nose was long and straight. His lips were a little thin, bright red and tempting. I couldn't help staring, entranced. So alike. He looked exactly like my white moonlight. The current emperor's harem was empty, and the court had long pressed him to fill it and secure heirs. He always refused, saying his bond with his original wife was lifelong and deep, and he would not select other women. The discussion at court was endless, until the Empress Dowager calmed it. She said the emperor was young and strong. There was no hurry about heirs. Rather than squabbling, the ministers should focus their efforts on finding the missing empress. My mother is gentle by nature and not hungry for power, the emperor told me softly in the night, as we lay on the couch. Seeing that I manage affairs well, she's begun to yield authority. Don't worry, Bella, I will bring you into the palace in glory and make you my empress. My head rested on his chest, his heart beat thunderous in my ear. Beneath it, my own heartbeat seemed especially calm and unhurried. I did not love my husband, but I did not love the emperor either. If I loved no one, then being empress seemed not so bad. If I truly became empress, there would be many things I could do that I could never do now. My belly grew by the day. Using my husband's absence as a pretext, the emperor stationed an imperial physician at the marquisate, officially to care for my mother-in-law and me. Once the physician arrived, he arranged midwives, maids, wet nurses, everything, flawlessly. I had nothing to worry about. My mother-in-law suspected nothing and only marveled at the emperor's kindness. Meanwhile, all sorts of rumors about my cousin and my husband drifted back to the capital. They said my cousin met danger, and my husband rescued her heroically. They said my husband met resistance as salt inspector, and my cousin advised him brilliantly, and so on and so forth. I listened absent-mindedly until one line caught my attention. There's a secret brothel in Eastlake District. The young lady saved a girl who'd escaped from there. Stop, I lifted my head. What's this about? It's that kind of brothel that hasn't been registered with the authorities. The servant explained. Most of the girls there are innocent young women who were sold in. The oldest is only in her teens. One of them couldn't bear the abuse anymore and escaped. She happened to run into the young lady. They say when my lady cousin found her, there wasn't a patch of sound skin left on her. My eyes darkened. Keep an eye on them from the shadows. When the time is right, give them some help, I said. Yes, madam. Once the servant left, my maids helped me lie down on the bed. Eyes unfocused, I stared at the green trees outside the window. 10-odd years ago, there had also been many such brothels in the capital. But a decade ago, someone defied all opposition and pushed for harsh laws to shut them down one by one. Those who broke the law were executed on the spot. The girls who'd suffered were properly cared for. After that, the capital never saw such places again. The one who pushed for those harsh laws was my white moonlight. On the day I gave birth, my husband still hadn't managed to return. Naturally, the emperor would not appear in public under everyone's eyes. It was my first childbirth, and it was hard. The imperial physician urged me again and again to push. Pain racked my whole body. I trembled, but could only grit my teeth as my consciousness drifted. Outside, my mother-in-law stamped in distress. In the end, she rushed into the birthing room, eyes red, and gripped my hand. Bella, don't be afraid. Mother's here. Wake up. Don't sleep. My birth mother had died when I was little. My mother-in-law's words struck my heart like a shot of medicine. At last, with a newborn's wail, my child was born. Congratulations, Marchioness. It's a girl. Good, good, good. My mother-in-law was too happy to speak, clutching my hand while ordering the servants to take good care of the baby. I drifted into sleep. Dimly, I heard that someone from the palace had arrived, bearing gold, silver, and jewels. My mother-in-law said I was unwell and thanked the emperor on my behalf. The emperor slipped over the wall into my room again in the dead of night. I was asleep, the baby lying in a cradle by the bed. He looked at the child, both delighted and at a loss. When I woke, I caught him in that clumsy first-time father moment and nearly burst out laughing. Seeing I was awake, he hurried over to the bed. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, helping me sit. "Don't worry, Your Majesty," I said with a smile. "Since you're here, why not give the child a name before you go? I've thought of many, but none seem quite right." He frowned. "No rush. When you're better, we'll decide together." "Don't worry, I've already thought of a way. Once the Marquise returns, I'll arrange your separation. Trust me, Bella, I will bring you into the palace as my empress in full honor." The emperor intended to speak plainly with my husband. Then, he would ask a trusted minister to adopt me as his daughter, claiming that I had married the emperor while convalescing in Jiangnan and had become pregnant, only to be lost on the road back to the capital. The only difficulty lay in my husband, who might not be so willing to divorce. But neither of us expected that the moment my husband returned to the capital, he would already be prepared to put me away. After returning to the marquisate, he first visited my mother-in-law, then came to see me. The moment he saw me, he proposed a divorce. That night, Lydia and I were stranded in the countryside, and then it started to rain. We slipped. A few days ago, the doctor said Lydia is 1 month pregnant. She says she won't be a concubine. Don't worry, I'll raise the child. You needn't worry about money. Take whatever you want, whatever I have. As long as you agree to the divorce, anything you want is yours. I was silent. Looking at the man before me, I recalled how, before I was married, Yongchang Marquis Manor had suddenly come to propose on the heir's behalf. My birth mother had been dead for years. My father remarried quickly and soon had a son and a daughter. He treated me with surface-level kindness. My stepmother was cool toward me. I never placed my hopes for a good match in their hands. Weighing my options, I agreed to the marriage quickly. Even then, I had already seen my husband clearly. He was soft-hearted and weak, easily swayed by temptation. His ears were soft, too, and he clung to old affections. When my cousin crooked a finger, he followed after her like a puppy. Yet if I stayed by his side day after day, he would also feel that having a virtuous wife was no bad thing. Luckily, he had been born into a marquisate as the legitimate heir. Even without great fortune, he would be a mediocre Yongchang Marquis all his life. I had chosen him precisely because of that soft heart. Thinking it over, it was hardly surprising he'd gone soft for my cousin too. Does mother know? I asked. He shook his head, embarrassed. You want me to tell her? I asked again. As he struggled in anxiety, I sighed. I'll agree to the divorce and speak to mother for you, I said. But I want to see my cousin alone first. My cousin came to the marquisate. Seeing me, she looked awkward. Bella, Her eyes were full of regret and remorse. That was more like it. I was reassured. My cousin had always been proud and ambitious. Over the years, she'd refused every proposal, yet left half the capital's young men bewitched. Some praised her for her beauty and talent. Others criticized her as unchaste. But as the only kin close enough to see clearly, I knew she simply enjoyed the thrill of being pursued and of taking what others wanted. Just as when she'd told my husband to return to me. Even if you and your wife live in harmony, so what? Whatever you gain is from my charity. She relished that feeling. She had always been hard to please. Once, she set her sights on 2 princes most likely to seize the throne. But after the new emperor's ascension, both were cast down from their height. Instead, my husband was suddenly favored and looked likely to rise in court. Only then did she remember him. But even if she favored him, she would not have offered herself up so easily. This time, things had gotten out of hand by accident. Don't be afraid, I've already agreed to the divorce, I said. I asked you here to ask only one thing. How are things with that secret brothel in Eastlake District? She blinked in surprise. The brothel in Eastlake District? You called me here. And you aren't going to ask about your husband? He's just a man. If you want him, you can have him, I said carelessly. That brothel, what have you managed so far? What about the girls? My cousin stared at me for a long time, then slowly lowered her eyes. I didn't get them out. The brothel's backed by powerful local clans in Jiangnan, tied to many high-ranking officials. I tried every way I could, but nothing worked. I could only bring Lily back to the capital for now and figure out more later. She told me in detail what she'd seen in Eastlake District. Who stood behind the brothel, and which powers were involved. Though she was an ant trying to shake a tree, she had done all she could. I understand, I said, memorizing each name carefully. You've already done very well. I'll think of what to do next. Don't worry, I'll agree to the divorce. She stared at me, dazed. You don't blame me, she finally asked, incredulous. I smiled. I don't blame you. Someone once told me that life is already hard enough for women. We shouldn't make it harder for each other. If a man fell in love with a married woman and was willing to wait for her to divorce and marry him, the world would probably praise him as deeply devoted. Why is it that when a man does this he's called faithful, but when a woman does, she's reviled by all? If I'm to blame you, I'll wait until men are reviled the same way, and then we'll condemn you together. Compared to that, if you had bowed to power and abandoned those girls, then I would blame you. My mother-in-law and I went to discuss the divorce. The moment she heard, she flew into a rage, dragged her ailing body out of bed, and had my husband beaten under the family law until he howled. He was whipped until he lost consciousness. My mother-in-law clutched her chest, fuming. Don't you worry, Bella. As long as I draw breath, no one will throw you out. So Liddy wants to marry into the Marquisate? Fine, I'll tell her she can come, but only as a concubine. I'll see if her family can swallow that. Mother, I tugged at her sleeve. I've already talked it over with my husband. I've agreed to everything. So what if you've agreed? So what if? She suddenly realized and fell silent. You've agreed? She asked, stunned. I nodded. She studied me for a long time, then dismissed the servants and sat me down. There's no one else here. You don't have to be afraid. Whatever it is, tell me. I'll stand up for you. I couldn't help laughing and crying. I reassured her again and again that it was my own decision. Even if I insisted on staying and Liddy had to enter as concubine, then what? I said. Would I spend the rest of my life fighting her in this big courtyard? You fought your husband's concubines for a lifetime. You know how bitter that is. My mother-in-law fell silent, her grip on my hand loosening a little. In his youth, my father-in-law spread his affections widely. His back courtyard was full of concubines and illegitimate children, and my mother-in-law spent her life exhausting herself. Only when he finally settled down in old age did she enjoy a few quiet days. But by then, her life was nearly over. Did His Majesty promise you a proper position? She suddenly asked. Now it was my turn to be surprised. How did you know? She patted my hand. I've managed this household for many years. The Emperor slips over the wall every night. How could I not know? I stared at her. You don't blame me for disgracing the Marquisate? She sighed. I know exactly what Bill has been like all these years. Believe me, I don't blame you at all. Between husband and wife, duty follows grace. Only when a husband shows grace can a wife owe him loyalty. I believe that if Bill were a man you could rely on, you would have stayed in this Marquisate all your life. I had only this one child. I spoiled him from the cradle and ruined him. Besides, you've cared for me all these years. I've long since come to think of you as my own daughter. Has His Majesty arranged everything for you and the child? She asked at the end, worried. I smiled and slowly returned her grip. Don't worry. Everything's arranged. After the divorce, the Yongchan Marquise quickly married Lydia Liu, the famous beauty of the capital city. The former Marchioness, it was said, had seen through the red dust and entered a convent. Her birth mother had died early. Her father and stepmother tried to persuade her, but seeing her resolve, they let her go. It was only a small incident. A few days later, greater news came from the palace. The Empress had returned to the capital. It was said the Empress was the legitimate younger daughter whom Grand Secretary Shu had raised in his hometown. She and the Emperor had fallen in love at first sight and married. After the wedding, Lady Shu had come to the capital with the Emperor to meet his parents. But they were accidentally separated on the road. Only after she discovered she was pregnant did she settle on a nearby estate. After giving birth to the eldest princess, she returned to the capital city. On the day of the enthronement ceremony for the Empress, the Emperor held my hand as we ascended the heavenly steps together. Looking down at the sea of bowed heads, I felt a sudden daze. My white moonlight's lifelong wish had been to stand here, to ease the people's suffering and bring them blessings. Now, I was standing here. With one difference. I was Empress Bella Shu. On my second day in the palace, I went to pay my respects to the Empress Dowager. She had been the late Emperor's Empress and had once borne a daughter, who unfortunately died in an accident 10 years ago. After the new Emperor took the throne, the Empress Dowager had ruled behind the curtain. When she saw everything running smoothly, she gradually released her grip and withdrew from politics. Although she was not his birth mother, the Emperor respected her as if she were. When she saw my face clearly, she was a little dazed. It feels as if I've seen you somewhere before. Perhaps I entered the palace as a child, and Mother saw me then, I said quickly, changing the subject. She took my hand, studying me closely, then suddenly smiled. Sit, she said. My fate with children is thin. In my old age, I have no one to dote on. The late emperor had only this son, so I treat him as my own. Seeing you today reminds me of the daughter I lost. I wonder if you've heard of Prince Aurora? Prince Aurora. The 4 syllables exploded in my mind like fireworks. 10 years had passed without anyone in the capital mentioning her name. Someone once so dazzling had vanished without a sound. I lowered my head quickly, hiding my tears. How could I not have heard of someone like Prince Aurora? I said. The Empress Dowager looked at me deeply, then spoke on. When she was alive, Aurora opened a school for girls in the capital and invited suitable girls from every family to study. Some families were old-fashioned, saying that a woman's ignorance was her virtue and refusing to let their daughters go. So Aurora went to each house herself to persuade them, promising that all books and paper would be free. They only had to send the girls. How could anyone refuse a princess? In the end, the school was filled with over 1,000 girls. Listening, my tears overflowed, dripping onto my empress robes. My stepmother had not wanted me to study much, and had planned to marry me off to some official in the provinces as soon as I came of age. When she heard about the girls' school, she refused to let me go. Who could have guessed that Prince Aurora would come to our door herself, reasoning and pleading until my stepmother agreed? And so I, 6 years old, gained the chance to learn to read. Though the court grumbled, the late emperor had only one child, so he let her do as she pleased. I remember a few years after the school opened, Aurora came to me, delighted, and said that there was a little girl from the Liu family, very young but with remarkable talent. The essays she wrote won praise from even the greatest scholars. Aurora said that if there were ever an imperial examination for women, that girl would be among the top names. At that, I could no longer hold back. I raised a hand to cover my face, letting the tears soak silently into my handkerchief. No matter how I tried to stifle them, a few tiny sobs escaped. 10 years. Prince Aurora had been dead 10 years. 10 years ago, she had urged the late emperor to establish examinations for women, allowing talented women to serve in court. Before he could agree, she had died. She had loved horseback riding. One day, her body was found dumped outside the city. The authorities investigated again and again and found only a few bandits. They claimed they had killed for money and did not know who she was. The emperor, enraged by his daughter's death, ordered a deeper investigation. But the bandits hanged themselves in their cells. And that was the end of it. In the 10 years since, no one had spoken her name. The Empress Dowager dismissed her attendants and drew me into her arms, gently stroking my hair. Good child, don't cry. It's all in the past. Only when my sobs had softened did she comfort me softly. It's over now. No, it hasn't, I muttered into her shoulder. We're still far from finished. The secret brothel in Eastlake District was wiped out. In the process, it dragged many filthy people and matters into the light. None escaped unscathed. The brothel had been built to entertain local officials and noble families who favored young girls and boys. These men had always been arrogant and cruel, playing their victims to death. It wasn't that no one had tried to report them, but the ones with power either played it safe or joined in. After a few years, no one dared mention it again. With time, people got used to it. But this time was different. A girl named Lily escaped and ran into the current Marchioness of Yongcheng. The Marchioness was kind-hearted. She took Lily in as a maid, protected her from the brothel's pursuit, and brought her safely back to the capital city. There, Lily beat the imperial drum to lodge her complaint. When the empress heard, she flared in fury and ordered a strict investigation. The local gentry hadn't taken it seriously at first. After all, the emperor was new to the throne, and the empress's father, Grand Secretary Shu, had already retired to enjoy his old age. How much trouble could they cause? Only when they were dragged to the execution ground did they realize. In the palace, Madame Liu, wife of Imperial Censor Li, visited while I was playing with the princess in my arms. Madame Liu had been my close friend since youth. I could deceive the world about who I was, but not her. After 3 cups of tea, she leaned close and reported quietly on the brothel case. Those involved were executed or exiled. The girls, if kidnapped, were given travel expenses and sent home. For those with nowhere to go, a girls' school was built locally, teaching them to read and sew, and supporting them until they were adopted or married. Most of the money came from the wives of officials at court. Madame Liu of Imperial Censor Li's house, Madame Xie of Vice Minister Wang's house, Madame Qian of Prefect Zhou's house, and many others. Time seemed to fold back on itself by more than 10 years. Back then, Prince Aurora discovered secret brothels in the capital. Rage and grief drove her to blow the matter open. People tried to dissuade her, saying the waters were too deep. Best to let it go. She refused. If I stay silent and you do nothing, who will speak? Who will act? Those little girls sold into brothels by their families, sick to death before they're grown, are we waiting for them to speak? Or the wives cast off for being barren, or sold because their husbands lost at gambling, women who spend their lives telling themselves they must accept their fate, are we waiting for them? Or those whose bodies were forced, who then bore the blame for men's crimes and were paraded as whores, drowned in cages, are we waiting for them to speak? We have read books and learned our characters. We hold power and money in our hands. If we don't speak, who will? Are we going to pass down this numb submission generation after generation? As she spoke, she was like the sun shining straight into our minds. We had once seen the light. Even though the sun had gone out, our hearts held 1,000 small flames. Those faint points of light flowed together like water, running toward the sea of the future. Just as Prince Aurora once described, in a future we can hardly imagine, girls will go to school and sit for exams, just like men, heads high beneath the sky. The princess babbled in my arms, waving her little fists at the cloth tiger in my hand. Madame Liu watched, delighted, her own eyes crinkled with laughter. "Has your majesty chosen a name for the princess?" she asked. "Yes," I nodded with a smile. "Her name will be Clara. Like the morning sun of tomorrow, dazzling and bright. Like our hopes. The end."